Dutch Harbor's star role in the American fishing industry is relatively new. Until a few decades ago, Alaskan waters were teeming with foreign vessels. Fishermen from Russia, Poland, Korea, and Japan all had discovered the richness of the North Pacific's continental shelf. American fishermen, on the other hand, were nowhere to be seen. Then, in 1976, Congress pushed the borders of the United States 200 miles out into the open ocean. The legislation was known as the Fishery Conservation and Management Act, and was later renamed the Magnuson-Stevens Act, after the senators who championed the cause, Republican Ted Stevens from Alaska and Warren Magnuson, Democrat from Washington State. The new territory was called the Exclusive Economic Zone, the EEZ, and it limited fishing in the area to American interests. Now, only American-flagged ships with American captains can fish within the EEZ. But the foreign ships had something the Americans did not have. To fish for weeks or months far from their own shores, foreign vessels had developed technology to process and freeze their catch right on board. American fishermen had little experience with that type of fishing, or with the Asian fish market and its insatiable demand for odd fish, and to the American palate, even odder fish products. And so, in the years after the Magnuson-Stevens Act was passed, U.S. companies hired foreigners, specifically Japanese, to teach them how to fish the Bering and to process fish products with specific Asian markets in mind. The FCA was one of the first American companies to start processing on board their ships, and from the start they sailed with senior-level Japanese crew. At the time, it wasn't an uncommon practice. What was unusual was the company's Japanese family history. FCA is owned by Karina Adler. Now in her late 50s, Adler founded the company in the mid-1980s, soon after divorcing from Masashi Yamada, a Japanese businessman 29 years her senior. Yamada, who is now in his 80s, remains a powerful businessman in Japan. He's involved in real estate, manufacturing, and fishing. Among his many holdings is controlling ownership of Anyo, a fishing company that operates 5 of its own factory ships and is the exclusive buyer of all of FCA's catch. Anyo calls the Fishing Company of Alaska its partner company. The FCA doesn't have its own website. Until recently, though, its boats and their whereabouts were detailed on Anyo's home page. Jeremy noticed the difference that the Japanese made right away. On his other boats, the captains relied on sonar fish finders and their own expertise to identify the best fishing grounds. On the Ranger, it was up to the head Japanese crew member. Everyone called him the Fishmaster. Jeremy didn't know the Fishmaster's real name, but he knew he was an important person on the boat. He often saw him alone in the wheelhouse, driving the ship. On Jeremy's other boats, only the captain or first mate did that. The Fishmaster had his own crew of technicians. There was a Japanese bosun, or deck boss, a Japanese factory manager, and a few Japanese engineers. It seemed to Jeremy that the Japanese were running the show, and he was told by guys who'd been working for the company much longer that it was the same way on all the FCA boats. Like the captain and first mate, Fishmaster Satoshi Kono had a private stateroom. The other Japanese technicians shared a bunkroom, and they all usually sat together at meals, apart from the rest of the crew. Jeremy would help Eric Haynes prepare a separate meal for them, often fish, and always rice. Kono would frequently come down to the galley to request a particular dish. It often seemed like he'd been drinking. One time, Kono even showed up in the galley with his pants on backward. Jeremy had heard that the Japanese didn't work directly for the Fishing Company of Alaska. In fact, they got their checks from North Pacific Resources, a subsidiary of Anyo, the Japanese company that bought the fish. None of them spoke much English. They spoke Japanese to one another, and when the Fishmaster was communicating with the captain, there was more yelling than talking. The captain was a screamer, and Kono got on his nerves more than anyone. They argued constantly. Jeremy saw it in the summer, during his first FCA trip, but recently the arguments had taken a more serious turn. The Arctic ice edge that normally pushes into the Bering a few hundred miles north of Dutch Harbor had crept unusually far south this winter. The seasonal ice is often broken into pancake-like chunks that can be 2 or 3 feet thick, and in certain wind conditions, migrate a mile in an hour. As January turned to February, the crew watched the captain and fishmaster butt heads about how fast the ship should be operated in ice.